Uh, okay, let me start the class because I don't know how many of you would be interested in the class, but still, let us start the class. So, this is our text, and we have two chapters left, chapters 14 and 15. So, let me start the 14th chapter, and that is titled A Journey with My Father. My shaven head after the sacred thread ceremony caused me one great anxiety. However partial Eurasian lads may be to things appertaining to the cow, their reverence for the Brahmin is notoriously lacking. So after the sacred thread ceremony, they had to shave their heads, and Tagore was really apprehensive how his classmates would react to his shaven head. So that apart from other missiles, our shaven heads were sure to be pelted with jeers. So he was afraid that his classmates would make fun of him. Uh, while I was worrying over this possibility, I was one day summoned upstairs to my father. How would I like to go with him to the Himalayas? I was asked. Away from the Bengal Academy and off to the Himalayas? Would I like it? Oh, that I could have rent the skies with a shout. That might have given some idea of the how. So during this time, fortune smiled on him, and his father summoned him, and he asked him whether he would like to go with him, would like to accompany him to a journey to the Himalayas. And Rabindranath was extremely happy, and he was feeling so ecstatic that he wanted to shout and express his happiness. So he says that I would have liked to shout with joy. And therefore, as uh, as we can see here, his reaction was really very positive. On the day of our leaving home, my father, as was his habit, assembled the whole family in the prayer hall for divine service. After I had taken the dust of the feet of my elders, I got into the carriage with my father. This was the first time in my life that I had a full suit of clothes made for me. So as he was going to a distant place, there was a full suit of clothes. My father himself had selected the pattern and color. A gold embroidered velvet cap completed my costume. This I carried in my hand, being assailed with misgivings as to its effect in juxtaposition to my hairless head. So actually there was a gold embroidered velvet cap, and as his head was shaven, obviously Tagore had some misgivings. He did not know how that cap would suit him, since he did not have hair on his head. As I got into the carriage, my father insisted on my wearing it, so I had to put it on. Every time he looked another way, I took it off. Every time I caught his eye, it had to resume its proper place. So he went on doing this, taking off the cap and then wear it again when his father was looking at him. My father was very particular in all his arrangements and orderings. He disliked leaving things vague or undetermined, and never allowed slovenliness or makeshifts. So Devendranath Tagore was very systematic. He did not like to be like his household to be slovenly or kind of idle and all that. So we wanted to make the arrangements. He had a well-defined code to regulate his relations with others and theirs with him. In this, he was different from the generality of his countrymen. With the rest of us, a little carelessness this way or that did not signify. So in our dealings with him, we had to be anxiously careful. It was not so much the little less or more that he objected to as the failure to be up to the standard. So when they were dealing with actually when he was dealing with his father, he had to be extra cautious. And his father actually did not like them to be careless in performing their duties. My father had also a way of picturing to himself every detail of what he wanted done. On the occasion of any ceremonial gathering at which he could not be present, he would think out and assign the place for each thing, the duty for each member of the family, the seat for each guest. Nothing would escape him. So you can well understand how Debendranath Tagore used to take really a very great interest in the running of the family, running of the household. After it was all over, he would ask each one for a separate account and thus gain a complete impression of the whole for himself. So not only was he satisfied with making the arrangements, but he also would, after the ceremony was over, he would ask them or ask them to give him a kind of a report about the ceremony, and from the different people he would gain different reports, and he would make up the whole. So while I was with him on his travels, though nothing would induce him to put obstacles in the way of my amusing myself as I pleased, he left no loophole in the strict rules of conduct which he prescribed for me in other respects. So when Rabindranath was traveling with his father, Debendranath Tagore did not want him to be unduly conscious or not to, he wanted him to enjoy himself, but still he made some rules for him to follow, and they were quite strict. Our first halt was to be for a few days at Bolpur. Sotto had been there a short time before with his parents. No self-respecting 19th century infant would have credited the account of his travels which he gave us on his return. But we were different and had had no opportunity of learning to determine the line between the possible and the impossible. So this, his nephew Sotto, he had been there in Bolpur, and he gave a kind of an account of his experience there. And Tagore says that actually uh, no, even a child would not have believed what he said, but to him, actually what was possible and what was impossible, that the line was very thin. Our Mahabharata and Ramayana gave us no clue to it, nor had we then any children's illustrated books to guide us in the way a child should go. All the hard and fast laws which govern the world we learned by knocking up against them. So they learned the laws in the hard way. Sotto had told us that unless one was very, very expert, getting into a railway carriage was a terribly dangerous affair. The least slip and it was all up. So actually this Sotto had this habit of exaggerating things, and he told Rabindranath that he had to be very really an expert in getting into the carriage, the railway carriage. Otherwise he would fall down. Then again, a fellow had to hold on to his seat with all his might. Otherwise, the jolt at starting was so tremendous, there was no telling where one would get thrown off to. So this was another lie. that when the train started, uh, all the passengers had to hold on to their seats very tightly, otherwise they would be thrown out. So when we got to the railway station, I was all a quiver. So naturally, Tagore was uh, a bit anxious. He was uh, nervous. So easily did we get into our compartment, however, that I felt sure the worst was yet to come. And when at length we made an absurdly smooth start without any semblance of adventure, I felt awfully disappointed. So everything went off smoothly, and Tagore was really surprised, and he felt that actually this was a kind of a lack of adventure. He had missed something. The train sped on. The broad fields with their blue-green border trees and the villages nestling in their shade flew past in a stream of pictures, which melted away like a flood of mirages. It was evening when we reached Bolpur. As I got into the palanquin, I closed my eyes. I wanted to preserve the whole of the wonderful vision to be unfolded before my waking eyes in the morning light. The freshness of the experience would be spoiled, I feared, by incomplete glimpses caught in the vagueness of the dusk. So when they reached Bolpur, it was evening time, and there was this palanquin, the palki, into which they got, where they uh, got into this palanquin, and Tagore closed his eyes because did not want to have a kind of an incomplete picture because it was already dark. He wanted to see everything in the morning light, next day that is. When I woke at dawn, my heart was thrilling tremulously as I stepped outside. My predecessor had told me that Bolpur had one feature which was to be found nowhere else in the world. This was the path leading from the main buildings to the servants' quarters, which, though not covered over in any way, did not allow a ray of the sun or a drop of rain to touch anybody passing along it. I started to hunt for this wonderful path, but the reader will perhaps not wonder at my failure to find it to this day. So again, this person Sotto had told him a lie, that there was a path which ran from the main building to the servants' quarters, and if one went along this path, then one would not be touched by sunlight or rain. So of course that was really a blatant lie. He made that up. It is not possible to for any person to avoid sunlight or rain. Town bred as I was, I had never seen a rice field, and I had a charming portrait of the cowherd boy of whom we had read pictured on the canvas of my imagination. I had heard from Sotto that the Bolpur house was surrounded by fields of ripening rice, and that playing in these with cowherd boys was an everyday affair, of which the plucking, cooking, and eating of the rice was the crowning feature. So this was another incident that had been narrated to him. I eagerly looked about me, but where, oh, where was the rice field on all that barren heath? Cowherd boys there might have been somewhere about, yet how to distinguish them from any other boys? That was the question. So obviously Tagore was looking for the rice fields and the cowherd boys on reaching that area, but unfortunately he could not find any of the two. However, it did not take me long to get over what I could not see. What I did see was quite enough. There was no servant rule here, and the only ring which encircled me was the blue of the horizon, which the presiding goddess of these solitudes had drawn round them. Within this I was free to move about as I chose. So you will remember in the previous chapter where Tagore had talked about how they were sort of dominated by the servants, and how he was not allowed to go out, and how this one servant had drawn a kind of a circle and he had forbidden him to go outside that circle. So there was in Bolpur no such restriction. Though I was yet a mere child, my father did not place any restriction on my wanderings. In the hollows of the sandy soil, the rainwater had plowed deep furrows, carving out miniature mountain ranges full of red gravel and pebbles of various shapes, through which ran tiny streams, revealing the geography of Lilliput. So the land of the Lilliputs, you will recall that the land of the Lilliputs, that is a story, a part of Gulliver's Travels, that classic book by Jonathan Swift. So it appeared really very small, the stream and the way it ran. From this region I would gather in the lap of my tunic many curious pieces of stone and take the collection to my father. He never made light of my labors. On the contrary, he waxed enthusiastic. "How wonderful!" he exclaimed. "Wherever did you get all these?" So Tagore, being a little boy, he was fascinated by all these pebbles, the colored pebbles, the curious pieces of stone, and he would take them to his father. And Debendranath Tagore never told him to throw them away, but instead he really shared his wonder and was really enthusiastic. "There are many, many more, thousands and thousands," I burst out. "I could bring as many every day." "That would be nice," he replied. "Why not decorate my little hill with them?" An attempt had been made to dig a tank in the garden, but the subsoil water proving too low, it had been abandoned unfinished, with the excavated earth left piled up into a hillock. On the top of this height my father used to sit for his morning prayer, and as he sat the sun would rise at the edge of the undulating expanse which stretched away to the eastern horizon in front of him. This was the hill he asked me to decorate. So when Tagore told his father that he had seen many more such stones, Debendranath asked him to decorate this little hill or hillock, the excavated earth that had piled up there, and where he used to sit for his early morning prayer. I was very troubled on leaving Bolpur that I could not carry away with me my store of stones. It is still difficult for me to realize that I have no absolute claim to keep up a close relationship with things, merely because I have gathered them together. So obviously when Tagore had to leave Bolpur, he could not carry all those stones with him. If my fate had granted me the prayer which I had pressed with such insistence, and undertaken that I should carry this load of stones about with me forever, then I should scarcely have had the hardihood to laugh at it today. So Tagore here is saying that if his prayer had been answered and he really wanted badly to take those stones with him, uh, so the load of stones, as he calls them metaphorically, uh, obviously he would not be laughing now. In one of the ravines I came upon a hollow full of spring water, which overflowed as a little rivulet, where sported tiny fish battling their way up the current. "I found such a lovely spring," I told my father. "Couldn't we get our bathing and drinking water from there?" "The very thing," he agreed, sharing my rapture, and gave orders for our water supply to be drawn from that spring. So as you can see, Devendranath Tagore was quite a person who was indulging his son, in a sense that he did not scold him or told him that he was being silly, nothing like that. Instead, he encouraged him and agreed with whatever he said. I was never tired of roaming about among those miniature hills and dales in hopes of lighting on something never known before. I was the living stone of this undiscovered land, which looked as if seen through the wrong end of a telescope. So he compares himself with the explorer Livingstone, who had gone to Africa, and he had discovered certain areas of the previously undiscovered Africa. Everything there, the dwarf date palms, the scrubby wild plums, and the stunted jambolans, was in keeping with the miniature mountain ranges, the little rivulet, and the tiny fish I had discovered. So everything looked very small at the wrong end of a telescope. So the telescope actually makes things bigger if we look through it, but here everything appeared to be kind of small. Here is a picture of, or rather a kind of a sketch of Rabindranath singing to his father. Probably in order to teach me to be careful, my father placed a little small change in my charge and required me to keep an account of it. He also entrusted me with the duty of winding his valuable gold watch for him. He overlooked the risk of damage in his desire to train me to a sense of responsibility. When we went out together for our morning walk, he would ask me to give alms to any beggars we came across, but I never could render him a proper account at the end of it. One day my balance was larger than the account warranted. So this is an account of how Tagore's father, he was actually training his youngest son to become a kind of a responsible person. He used to give a small amount of money to Tagore and ask him to keep an account of it. And he also gave him the responsibility of winding his valuable gold watch. Maybe any other father or any other guardian would not have left his watch in the hands of a boy, a mere boy, but Devendranath Tagore gave him that responsibility. Uh, so one day his balance was larger than the account warranted. So it became really a mystery how he did that. I really must make you my cashier, observed my father. Money seems to have a way of growing in your hands. So his father was amused. That watch of his I wound up with such indefatigable zeal that it had very soon to be sent to the watchmakers in Calcutta. So obviously, what happened to that valuable gold watch? Tagore was so zealous in winding that watch that something happened to it, and it had to be sent for repairs in Calcutta. I am reminded of the time when later in life I was appointed to manage the estate and had to lay before my father, owing to his failing eyesight, a statement of accounts on the 2nd or 3rd of every month. I had first to read out the totals under each head, and if he had any doubts on any point, he would ask for the details. If I made any attempt to slur over or keep out of sight any item which I feared he would not like, it was sure to come out. So these first few days of the month were very anxious ones for me. So Tagore now recalls a later period when he had been given the charge of the estate, the family estate, and he had to sort of present the accounts to his father at the beginning of each month, and that was an anxious time for him. As I have said, my father had the habit of keeping everything clearly before his mind, whether figures of accounts or ceremonial arrangements or additions or alterations to property. He had never seen the new prayer hall built at Bolpur, and yet he was familiar with every detail of it, from questioning those who came to see him after a visit to Bolpur. He had an extraordinary memory, and when once he got hold of a fact, it never escaped him. So here we are getting a lot of information about what kind of a person Debendranath Tagore was. My father had marked his favorite verses in his copy of the Bhagavad Gita. He asked me to copy these out with their translation for him. At home, I had been a boy of no account, but here, when these important functions were entrusted to me, I felt the glory of the situation. So he had this important task of uh, copying the favorite verses from the Bhagavad Gita for his father. By this time, I was rid of my blue manuscript book and had got hold of a bound volume of one of Lett's diaries. I now saw to it that my poetizing should not lack any of the dignity of outward circumstance. It was not only a case of writing poems, but of holding myself forth as a poet before my own imagination. So when I wrote poetry at Bolpur, I loved to do it sprawling under a young coconut palm. This seemed to me the true poetic way. Resting thus on the hard, unturfed gravel in the burning heat of the day, I composed a martial ballad on the defeat of King Prithvi. So this was the time when he started to write his poems. Uh, and in spite of the superabundance of its martial spirit, it could not escape an early death. That bound volume of Lett's diary has now followed the way of its elder sister, the blue manuscript book, leaving no address behind. So Tagore says that the first blue manuscript that which he had used to write poetry, that was lost or destroyed, and this one also, a copy of Lett's diary, uh, that was also gone. We left Bolpur and making short halts on the way at Sahibganj, Dinapur, Allahabad and Kanpur, we stopped at last at Amritsar. So they reached Punjab. An incident on the way remains engraved on my memory. The train had stopped at some big station. The ticket examiner came and punched our tickets. He looked at me curiously as if he had some doubt which he did not care to express. He went off and came back with a companion. Both of them fidgeted about for a time near the door of our compartment and then again retired. At last came the station master himself. He looked at my half ticket and then asked, "Is not the boy over 12?" "No," said my father. I was then only 11, but looked older than my age. "You must pay the full fare for him," said the station master. My father's eyes flashed as, without a word, he took out a currency note from his box and handed it to the station master. When they brought my father his change, he flung it disdainfully back at them, while the station master stood abashed at this exposure of the meanness of his implied doubt. So actually Tagore was 11 years old, but since he looked a bit older, so his father had bought a half ticket for him. So if a child or if a boy or a girl attained the age of 12, he or she was actually full ticket had to be bought, but the full fare actually had to be paid, and the station master told Devendranath Tagore to pay the full fare, as he suspected that Debendranath Tagore was not speaking the truth, that Rabindranath was really 12 years old. But that was not the case, and Debendranath really was angry at the way they had behaved with him. The golden temple of Amritsar comes back to me like a dream. Many a morning have I accompanied my father to this Guru Darbar of the Sikhs in the middle of the lake. There the sacred chanting resounds continually. My father, seated amidst the throng of worshippers, would sometimes add his voice to the hymn of praise, and finding a stranger joining in their devotions, they would wax enthusiastically cordial, and we would return loaded with the sanctified offerings of sugar crystals and other sweets. So, as Rabindranath describes how in the Golden Temple of Amritsar, they took part in the, the prayer, and Debendranath used to sing with with the Sikhs there. One day, my father invited one of the chanting choir to our place and got him to sing us some of their sacred songs. The man went away probably more than satisfied with the reward he received. The result was that we had to take stern measures of self-defense. Such an insistent army of singers invaded us. So Debendranath had rewarded the singer profusely, and he had gone and told his friends that Debendranath was a rich person, and if they could sing to him, they would be amply rewarded, and so they flocked to his house. When they found our house impregnable, the musicians began to waylay us in the streets. And as we went out for our walk in the morning, every now and then would appear a tambura slung over a shoulder, at which we felt like game birds at the sight of the muzzle of the hunter's gun. Indeed, so wary did we become that the twang of the tambura from a distance scared us away and utterly failed to bag us. So those singers would really accost them when they were out for their morning walk. And the tambura, of course, it is a kind of I think it's a tanpura or something like that, which they had and which they played when they sang. But they would run away when they would hear the sounds of the tambura. When evening fell, my father would sit out in the veranda facing the garden. I would then be summoned to sing to him. The moon has risen, its beams passing through the trees have fallen on the veranda floor. I am singing in the behag mode, O companion in the darkest passage of life. So this is another memory that Tagore recollects here, how he used to sing to his father during the evenings. My father, with bowed head and clasped hands, is intently listening. I can recall this evening scene even now. I have told of my father's amusement on hearing from Srikanto Babu of my maiden attempt at a devotional poem. I am reminded how, later, I had my recompense. On the occasion of one of our Magh festivals, several of the hymns were of my composition. One of them was, The eye sees thee not, who art the pupil of every eye. So we are reminded how Srikanto Babu, about whom we had read in a one chapter, in a previous chapter, how he had taken Tagore to Devendranath Thakur, and uh, at that time Tagore had composed a poem, but Devendranath Tagore did not think very highly of that. But later on, during the Maghotshav, some of the hymns had been composed. Quite a few of the hymns had been composed by Rabindranath, and he recalls one of them. My father was then bedridden at Chinsura. He sent for me and my brother Jyoti, that is Jyotirindranath Thakur. He asked my brother to accompany me on the harmonium and got me to sing all my hymns one after the other. Some of them I had to sing twice over. When I had finished, he said, if the king of the country had known the language and could appreciate its literature, he would doubtless have rewarded the poet. Since that is not so, I suppose I must do it. With which he handed me a check. So, as you can see in Chinsura, Rabindranath Tagore was sick, and he sent for Rabindranath and Jyotirindranath, and Jyotirindranath was asked to play the harmonium, and Rabindranath was asked to sing the hymns that were used to be sung in the Maghotshav, and Rabindranath was really very happy when he heard the songs, and he rewarded his youngest son with a check. My father had brought with him some volumes of the Peter Parley series from which to teach me. He selected the life of Benjamin Franklin to begin with. He thought it would read like a storybook and be both entertaining and instructive. But he found out his mistake soon after we began it. Benjamin Franklin was much too businesslike a person. The narrowness of his calculated morality disgusted my father. In some cases, he would get so impatient at the worldly prudence of Franklin that he could not help using strong words of denunciation. So this book, the Peter Parley series, actually it had stories about the lives of famous persons, and Benjamin Franklin was one of them. But ultimately, Devendranath did not like the story. Before this, I had nothing to do with Sanskrit beyond getting some rules of grammar by rote. My father started me on the second Sanskrit reader at one bound, leaving me to learn the declensions as we went on. The advance I had made in Bengali stood me in good stead. My father also encouraged me to try Sanskrit composition from the very outset. With the vocabulary acquired from my Sanskrit reader, I built up grandiose compound words with a profuse sprinkling of sonorous M's and N's, making altogether a most diabolical medley of the language of the gods. But my father never scoffed at my temerity or rashness. So Tagore was asked to read the Sanskrit grammar, and he had to compose some, some verses or like something like that. And Tagore was very extremely pompous, and he used ornamental language while writing these compositions. Then there were the readings from Proctor's Popular Astronomy, which my father explained to me in easy language, and which I then rendered into Bengali. So these were some of the books which actually were studied by Rabindranath. Among the books which my father had brought for his own use, my attention would be mostly attracted by a 10 or 12 volume edition of Gibbon's Rome. They looked remarkably dry. Being a boy, I thought, I am helpless and read many books because I have to. But why should a grown-up person who need not read unless he pleases bother himself so? So Tagore was mystified. Actually, Debendranath Tagore was actually he was reading these volumes written by Edward Gibbon, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which is a very, very ponderous and very difficult kind of a historical work. Uh, and Tagore was really surprised that why his father had chosen to read such books, which were really very boring, very dry. Uh, since he was a grown up, he could very well choose what books he would be reading. So, why was he reading such boring books? So, here we come to the end of this chapter, and this is a long chapter which talks about where Tagore talks about his wanderings with his father, as you can see, and journey with my father, how he went to the uh, on a journey with his father from Bolpur, and then finally they landed in Amritsar. So this is the account of, and we get a lot of information about Debendranath Tagore also from this particular chapter. So I'll stop here today